What's going on, everybody? Josh here with Angler's Tale, and welcome back to another video. If you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. If you're an OG, welcome back. In today's episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a lure. This is my first time actually ever building a lure, and it's going to be a glide bait. So we're going to learn how to do this together, and I'm going to show you guys step by step how I built the glide bait. Also, I want to give you guys a quick little sneak peek on the next build that I got going on, which is a little bit more detailed, and I'm looking forward to dropping that video here in a couple weeks. So be looking forward to that. So without further more ado, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so you guys are going to want to start by drawing out what size that you want the lure to be. And we're going to cut that out. Right now what we're doing is we're rolling out the clay to the thickness that we want the lure to be. So we're going to take that cutout of the drawing of our lure, apply it onto the clay. And we're going to cut out around it. So right now I'm using some scissors. I did order some clay tools, but I've been waiting for them in the mail, so they're going to come a little bit later in the video. Just the first build, a little eager and ready to get it going. Alright, we're going to peel that off. Looks pretty good. Alright, so now we're following the instructions on the back of the clay, which is to set your oven at 275, and you're going to let it bake for 15 minutes every quarter-inch thickness that the clay is. So we got that, we're pulling that out now. So now what we're doing is we're rolling out a thin layer of clay to put on the outer side of the inner layer that we just baked. Now we're going around and cutting it probably about a quarter of an inch all the way around it. We're going to peel away all the extra clay there. Alright, so we're going to take this up and we're going to roll it out and make sure that it's all smooth. After that, we're going to work around the edges here. And you're going to try and kind of split the difference of the clay. So you're going to cut right down the middle. And it'll look something like this. No, it's not perfect, but it'll do. And we're just going to use the bottom part of this pen, which is 8mm, to make a punch for the eye. And we are still waiting on the tools in this part of the build, so I've just decided to use a pen and mark out the gill plate area. Alright, so what I decided to do for the scale is I just got some fishing line right here wrapped around my fingers, and I'm just going to press it firmly onto the clay to make an indent of the line. And then we're going to crisscross that and go the opposite way. And this is going to give us a good diamond pattern that actually worked pretty good. Now it's actually starting to look like a fish. So we're going to start up the oven, put it back in there at 275 for 15 minutes. And I did skip ahead and did the exact same thing on the other side, and now we've baked it. Only problem with doing that is now that I've taken it out, baking it on one side has made that side flat. So I think for future builds I will build some type of a frame to hold it up vertically so that way it's not cooking on one side, but not a big deal. So now we got it marked up the angle that we want to make the joint cut at, and I'm using my speed square right here just to get a straight line. Alright, it's looking pretty good. We're going to take it out in the garage and put it in the vise. Make sure that you either wrap this with a towel or a cloth, so that way you're not going to get vise marks in the clay itself. And as you can see here, I'm going straight in for the cut, and that's just because I'm making a guide. And then now I'm going to start cutting it at an angle. flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Now you could make a guide, so that way you get a perfect cut. I didn't decide to go that route, but that's okay. I think it turned out just fine. Not a bad cut. Alright, so this is the cut. Turned out pretty clean. And this is what it's looking like now. So now I'm just marking up the slots that I'm going to cut out so that way the rod can go in. I'm just going to mark this other side up with the speed square, and this is what it's looking like. Alright, so I'm also going to go and put the rod in there, mark it dead center so that way I can get a hole for where I'm going to drill the hole for it to go through. Alright, we're back out in the garage, got it in the vise. We're going to start cutting those slots out. Alright, so now we're just going to use a flathead screwdriver and a hammer, and we're going to hit the bottom side of it out. There you go. So now we are drilling the holes for the hardware, and we're just gonna make sure that we're drilling it dead center. Okay, so now I'm getting in here, I'm going to mark the slots out, and we're going to go just a little bit underneath the top and the bottom part of those slots and mark those holes, that way we won't have too much movement of the lure up and down. Alright, so for the hardware, what I'm doing is I have some galvanized steel wire here that I'm going to wrap around the screwdriver. Try my best to show you guys. My fingers are in the way. And this is what it's going to look like. Flip that off, that tag end off. And now you see that there's a little end that's protruding out, so I'm just going to take the pliers and bend that in. So now we got a perfect circle. And I'm going to bend the other tag part out, so that way it's going straight down the middle. Like, make it look something like that. And we're doing a little bit of super glue we're putting on the end here, and we're just going to put it in the holes that we drilled. Now if you get a little bit of super glue on here, like as you can see, make sure that you wipe it away because that will show up in the mold. Alright, so now this part's going to get a little tricky. I'm marking up where I want the rod to go into place, lining it with the hole that I drilled. And we're just figuring out what angle that we want to have here. There's one way you can do it where you can just pour your resin and then put your eye screws in and, you know, back them in, back them out, and fine tweak it where you want it to. I don't want to do that. I want to have it set correctly. I think that's going to hold the hardware in the lure a lot better than just to screw them in. So now I'm making sure that they're lined up, putting the rod through. Everything looks good. Double check, make sure everything's centered. And what we're doing right here is going to be hard to show. I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit. I'm backing the screw eyes to the line, which would be the back part of the rod, because that's right where it would sit. So that way when I'm bending this joint, I want it to be at a 150-degree angle Looks like a lot of my other glide baits are at that angle, which is funny because they all have different action. But I definitely want more of the chop style type of glide bait. Alright, so now we are building the frame to pour the silicone. I decided to go with the Legos because give me a good quality time spending with the kids. You see my youngest is goofing off a little bit. So now we have potter's clay that we're putting in here, and look at what finally arrived. The tools. So now I'm just going around and marking all around the lure. And we're going to take that tool and we're going to start carving out some of the clay. So that way we can fit 1/2 of the lure into it. Alright, so you want to make sure that you are splitting it 50-50. So you have 50% of the lure under the clay and 50% of it is up and exposed. Finding that running my finger across the clay is making it smooth out a lot easier, and then you can build up some of the clay around the edges and then just smooth that in. Seemed to work out the best for me. Alright, so right now I'm making some pilot holes, and what this is going to do is once I pour the second part of the silicone in, it's going to give it something that where it can lock into place. And I'm thinking we're just going to go with probably 6, should be enough. So right now I built up some clay for my pour holes, and I also have the galvanized steel rods in there for air bubble vents. This is the silicone that I'm going to be using. Never used it before, so I don't really have a strong opinion on it, but from what I've seen and what I've been reading is you're supposed to pour it on light to try and get all the air bubbles out of it. So we're just going to do a light coat over the top part of the glide bait and the bottom part of the glide bait. And just pour all the rest of it in. Alright, so we came back to it. It's all cured now. We're going to start pulling out the clay. Make sure that we get that all out of there and it's really nice and clean. So you don't want to leave any of the clay behind. It will show in your pour. Okay, so now that we have it all cleaned out, what we have here is some petroleum jelly. I've got a paintbrush that I'm going to use this on every part of silicone that is on the surface, because if you don't use this, it could bind with the other silicone that you're pouring and then it'll ruin the mold. We're pouring in the other side right now. Alright, so we've given that about 24 hours to sit. Alright, so we pulled it apart, and given it was my first pour, I figured I was gonna have some air bubbles, so we do have some air bubbles. I think for the next pour I'm gonna give it a little bit more time for those air bubbles to come out, but it's gonna be okay. Now I'm figuring out how I want to rig up the hardware. So I got the galvanized steel wire right here. This is actually 14 gauge, probably a little too thick. I think for the next build I'm going to go a little bit thinner on the diameter. But we just got that crimped up and put it into the vise. I'm going to turn that around like 4 times. That sure looks good. Alright, so now that we've been working on the hardware, we got that going, now we got to figure out the volume of the glide bait itself. So I'm just filled up a cup of water right to the brim. Make sure that you have a bowl underneath it, so when you dunk it under, it will collect that water that's spilling over. And then now I have that water. We're going to weigh the water in grams. And it's roughly around 45 grams. So now we're getting to the resin. So I decided to go with the polyurethane resin. You can use epoxy resin too. I don't know too much of the difference between them, but I know that those two work, and that's what people are using. I decided to go with polyurethane, and we're just gonna see how it works. Alright, so this is a 1-in-1 mix. So basically what we're gonna do is, it is 45 grams, so we're just gonna divide that by 2. So that will give us 22.5 grams for part A and 22.5 grams for part B. And I got the micro balloons right here. This is gonna allow your resin to float. So what you wanna use is about 10% of what your overall volume is. So our volume is 45 grams. That means we need 4.5 grams. And we're just gonna stir that in. I'm stirring it in with the part B mix. I don't think it matters if it's in part A or part B. That's just how I poured it in there. And we're just gonna make sure that we stir this up really good. Some of those micro balloons seemed like they were clumped together. So now we are pouring in part A to part B. And we got a 2-minute work time, so we gotta work fast. Stir that up really good. Once you feel the cup getting warm, then that's when you're gonna wanna start pouring it. So we just poured it right here. Probably back off a little bit on the volume since the micro balloons actually helps it expand. That's why it's overflowing so much. We'll do that in the next pour. Taking it out right now. Looks like everything worked the way it's supposed to. The vent hole is filled up, and now we got to put some weights on it. If we didn't put the weights on it, it would just float on its side like this. So once we put the weights on it, it's actually going to let it sit vertical. Alright, so now we're going to figure out where we want the weights to go on the lure. So I got this rigged up right here on my wall, drawn out on my wall. This is a level line for the horizontal and vertical. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a thumbtack with a piece of tape on the lure, and we're going to have a couple holes on the tape that we're going to punch through and let that see where the center of gravity is going to have it, depending on what angle I want the lure to fall. I want it to be flat, so I decided to make sure that it looked like it was flat. And what we're going to do is on the bottom part of this line, we're going to mark it up with a pencil, and then we're going to know that that's the center of the weight and where I need to put it. So now that we found out where the center of the weight needs to be, we have put it on the lure, and we 3 times the amount of weight that I originally had put on there, and it sinks. So now we have put the weight onto the hardware. I'm going to clamp it in here with a vise, just so that way it's narrow enough that it's not going to stick out after the pour. Make sure that it's all within inside the resin pour. Alright, so here we are. I'm thinking if I'm pressing this in with both sides that it should be just directly in the middle. So I did pour one. Unfortunately it raised, so I got another piece of little galvanized steel wire here that I cut and put in here. That's going to hold it into place. So we just made another pour, taking that apart, and looks good. It doesn't look like that hardware moved out of place. And right now what we're doing is we're working on a silicone tail. This is just a silicone mat that's 1/8 thick, and just freehand drew a tail. Alright, so now back to the vise. We're going to actually cut a 1/8 thick slot out from the back for the tail. Alright, so we just got done cutting out that slot. What we're doing now is we got some JB Weld 5-minute epoxy. Just need a little dab of that, stir it up really good. And we're going to take the tail, dip it on both sides, make sure that we get the top. And we're going to push that into the slot, and we're going to sit and let it wait. It only really takes about like 5 minutes to cure. I would give it like an extra 15 minutes just to make sure that it's solid. And here we are. We're actually going to do the airbrush. I've never airbrushed before, so I'm just getting a couple little test runs in. We're going to do the back here black. This is color black I'm using. And I'm finding it's going to be a little bit easier to paint it while it's sitting on its side. So the next color we're going with is turquoise. So I'm going to spray the turquoise probably halfway down the lure, show you guys what it looks like right here. It's coming along. After that we're going with silver. So we're going to do silver underneath that turquoise, going down towards the belly. And for the belly we are doing white. And this is where we're at with it right now. I think I'm going to use the turquoise and go over everything just so it has a nice blend to it. Alright, so we're done with the painting. We're doing a clear coat, so I'm going to put 3 coats of this on there. Alright, so now that's done, it's dried, we are using the 5-minute epoxy again. I got a Q-tip here I'm dipping in. Gonna work on getting that eye in. We're gonna flip the Q-tip around, make sure we're not getting any resin on it, and make sure that we're pressing that in and holding it for a second. So now the lure's done. I think it looks pretty good, but it's for the real test now. Does it have good action? Seems to have a pretty decent wide glide to it, and definitely has a pretty good chop. I'll try a faster chop retrieve right here and see what it looks like. I mean, I am blown away at how good it turned out at this point. And we're gonna see if, yep, we got the 180. Awesome. So here's the real test. We're gonna take it out and see if it'll catch a fish. Oh my god. Guys, I had a bass on. Are you kidding me? No, he's on there still. Oh my gosh. I don't even know if he's that big, but he is pretty big. Wow. That's a big bass, guys. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. No way. All right, getting it done. We're gonna have to get a weight on it. See? Nice. Check that out though, guys. All right, guys, first bass on it right here. Check that out. New taking this to this pond right here. Skizzer shed color. Alright, the eyes are still on there too. Yeah, I thought he spit it. I don't know what happened. I was feeling tension on the line and then I didn't feel anything. I thought I blew it. We're gonna get a weight on her and we're gonna get her back in the water. Check that out. Alright, we're on pounds here, guys. See what she weighs. Oh, it's 4-pound bass. So we got the weight on her. She was actually 4.2, but she's super long, just super thin. That's all. But hey, thank you so much for that fight. Let's get a good release on her. There she goes.